All right, welcome everyone to this virtual side event, What Works to Amplify the Rights and Voices of Youth in Peace and Resilience Building, Lessons from the Meta-Synthesis of the UN Evaluation to Advance the UN's Youth Strategy. And this is a side event that is organized on the sidelines of the 2023 ECOSOC Youth Forum. My name is Romeral Ortiz Quintilla. I work for the Office of the UN Secretary General Envoy on Youth, and I had previously been part of the research team that developed this report and that is being presented today. So it's really my pleasure to be your moderator today. So this report aims to guide future youth programming in the area of peace and resilience, and as it was mentioned, to accelerate the implementation of the UN Youth Strategy, Youth 2030. The report includes lessons on youth engagement in peace and resilience building, and following a meta-synthesis of over 120 United Nations evaluation. It has been co-led by the evaluation offices of UNFPA and UNICEF, and it involved 11 organizations, including the Office of the Secretary General Envoy on Youth and youth-led organization. So in this event today, we'll start with a first segment of welcoming remarks. It's going to be followed up by a presentation of the highlights of the meta-synthesis, and then we'll have a panel discussion before going into the closing remarks. So without further ado, let's start. And I would like to give the floor to Rosalie Akombe, Chief of the Peacebuilding Strategy and Partnership Branch, Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Peacebuilding Support Office, for her openings remarks. Over to you, Rosaline.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, if I may be allowed to use that term, Romero. And I'm told that you were stolen from us, so we hope we'll be able to steal you back at some point. But I really want to thank you for this opportunity, and to also really express our deep appreciation to UNFPA and UNICEF for inviting us to participate in this really important event at the margins of the discussions that are taking place in ECOSOC related to youth. That is a youth forum. I think, I was asked to speak broadly first about the peace building context that we find ourselves in, and maybe I'll just add 2 or 3 points that link to the report that is being launched today. And again, really want to say how happy we were to have participated as part of the reference group for this report, and to say, it's really great that UNICEF and UNFPA worked on this evaluation, and with a lot of expertise. It was a very interesting report to read from my end. Maybe just in terms of the context, I think what, it's not for all of you who watch what's going on in the world would not be surprised at the concern that the Secretary General has expressed about the polarization that we see and the multilateralism in peril, which has an impact, obviously, on peace building, on prevention, and all aspects of our work. And I think what we see is that more and more we're seeing an increase really in the number of conflicts that are out there. We're seeing, large numbers of people, especially young men and women, living in places of conflict. Without adding Sudan and without adding Ukraine, already in 2021, we were seeing an increase of conflicts and people living in conflict by, an increase of 46%. It really is, since the end of the World War, this is the largest number of conflicts that we have, which means then for us who are engaged in peace building and in prevention on peace and security issues, we have a lot on our plates to do. And yet, really at a time when the context is really polarized, when you need international attention, that international attention is waning because of the sort of global north, global south dynamics that we have, but even within the big powers, just that lack of unity of purpose to address issues of peace building. But it's interesting that amidst all this, we still see really quite a strong engagement by young people. And the fact that you have this ECOSOC forum going on is an indication that the youth of this world are telling us that you gotta get your acts together. They have not stopped, even in context of polarization, even at the national level. Even in the face of constricted civic space, young men and women have come out to raise concerns, to advocate for change, but to also put in place ways in which we can either deal with our climate emergency, or how we can deal with peace building in general. So there is hope that if we continue seeing the sort of advocacy from young women and men across the world, we will be able really to address those concerns. And this brings me really to the big message that we are seeing from the Secretary General in the new Agenda for Peace, where he's saying, yes, we are having a polarized world, but actually it is moments like this that the United Nations is established for, to be able to come together and bring the world together to put forward cooperation instead of conflict, to address the issues that we deal with. And really, we really appreciate all the comments that as a department that we got from young women and men during the various consultations. We're looking forward to seeing the report out in the next few months. And we hope that it will help really in addressing a lot of the issues of peace and security, but also on peace building and prevention in general. The second point that I wanted to emphasize from our end is that we see a deficit in data all the time. And so for us, anytime there is a report that comes out that helps amplify the voices, that brings out the cases, is really, it helps us, and it provides us the evidence base that we need to use for our advocacy work, whether it's with the Security Council or with the Peace Building Commission or with ECOSOC or whichever body within the organization. And so would urge that we continue doing this sort of reports that are looking at the programmatic work, but they're also linking it to the policy decisions that need to be made, which is really absolutely important. I think related to that, the other point would like to make, and the report actually makes it very strongly, is that financing matters. That we cannot just have a rhetorical focus about youth, peace and security and talk about resolutions that emphasize the meaningful participation of young people, but we do not provide the funding for it, whether it's funding at national level or it's funding at global level. It's really important that we do that. And that's why I think we are all very pleased, for instance, that we now have a very strong youth office coming up soon, because what it shows is that the rhetorical commitment of our member states is being translated into action by actually providing resources within the organization to be able to push this. And I think from our end, that's why you've seen the Peace Building Fund really investing a lot in YPS. I think we can proudly say that the Youth Promotion Initiative is maybe one of the largest funds that is out there that is specifically focusing on youth peace and security. I mean, we have together, so far between 2016 and 2022, $128 million has been invested in 97 projects in close to 30 countries. And we are really pleased that we just launched the process for the new projects, and we hope that we can get projects that really foster youth inclusive political processes, that promote the political participation of young people, but also protect the civic space that we see really being constrained. And then the last point I will make is around platforms for engagement with young women and men. And I think that is something that we know makes a difference. That the voices, for the voices of young women and men to be heard and in the peace and security area space, we must be able to provide these platforms And that's why we read very, very keenly the Secretary General's policy brief that was done, Romero, by your office on the meaningful youth engagement in policymaking and decision-making processes, because it counts to be engaged in decision-making. You know, one of my former staff when I was at UNDP always told me that, always said that, you know, if you are not on the table, around the table, then you are on the table, you are the menu. You're the one being eaten. And so it's really important that young women and men sit around the table where decisions are being made, and that decisions are not, that impact their lives are not made for them, but with them. And that is one of the things that I keep emphasizing. We cannot keep talking about including young people. We cannot include the majority. We have to center them, because this is the reality of most of the countries where at least we work in conflict settings. And so, you know, we need to do more in terms of opening those spaces and providing the platforms where young women and men can bring contributions that will lead us to working on peace and security. With those very, very many remarks, I want to say thank you very much and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Rosalind. I think you gave a great overview of a few of the points we'll be touching today. As you were mentioning, young people remain engaged. And the question is also now how the UN, we are actually making sure that that engagement is meaningful, through which platforms. You also mentioned the question of financing. I know we have excellent panelists today who will also touch upon this question, which is the funding available to youth-led organization working on peace and resilience. So thank you so much for these opening remarks. And with that, I would like now to give the floor to Sudha Balakrishnan, head of the Youth 2030 Secretariat at the Office of the UN Secretary General Envoy on Youth, to provide her remarks. Over to you, Sudha.
Thank you, Romeral, and thank you, Rosalind. This was great conversation already starting up for the day. Greetings, everyone, from the SG's Envoy on Youth. Delighted to be here with you all today for the launch of the report, What Works to Amplify the Rights and Voices of Youth in Peace and Resilience Building. Meaningful youth engagement is at the heart of Youth 2030, the UN's youth strategy launched in 2018 by the UN Secretary General. It underlines youth participation as a starting point to building sustainable peace, sustainable societies, and eventually a sustainable world. Meaningful youth engagement has been recognized in numerous resolutions from the UN on peace and resilience, including by the UN Security Council when they adopted the first resolution on youth, peace, and security in 2015. We are now at a crucial point in the implementation of 2030. We are at the halfway mark, and we are off track on several goals. We clearly need to accelerate, and we need evidence to accelerate. This report is the evidence on the peace and resilience agenda and provides us with several key insights on what works and what is the effect of meaningful youth engagement on the agenda. While we will hear more in details on the lessons, key lessons learned soon, I wanted to touch on some important takeaways that resonated with me. Meaningfully engaging young people in peace and security issues can significantly improve the relevance, legitimacy, sustainability, and impact of UN projects. The second one is around capacities. Building capacities of young people and creating an enabling environment for youth to engage can have a direct effect on conflict and peace dynamics. And improving intergenerational trust and solidarity has a transformational and positive effect in projects connected to peace and security. And one very critical takeaway for me is creating youth-inclusive, strategic, and multi-stakeholder partnerships across a whole band of stakeholders, including civil society, governments, and the private sector, significantly contributes to the effectiveness and reach of projects. It is important to build on these lessons learned and integrate them as the UN system supports acceleration over the next 7 to 8 years to 2030. The Office of the SDGs Envoy on Youth and the upcoming new UN Youth Office are fully committed to this as we continue to coordinate the UN Youth Strategy in close collaboration with the UN system and across the UN system with young people on the peace and resilience agenda. As I conclude, I wanted to make a reference, as Rosalind did, to the Secretary General's policy brief on meaningful youth engagement published last week that will continue to guide the work of the UN and all member states on ensuring that young people are at the center of all our efforts, including the efforts on building peace and resilience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sudha, for those remarks. Again, great points. I think we are really going into looking how do we unpack this meaningful youth engagement and what does it mean in particular for peace and resilience. So thank you for those remarks. And now for the last remarks, we'll have a video message from Marco Segone, UNFPA Director of the Evaluation Office, and Robert McCourt, UNICEF Director of Evaluation Offices, who will share on the value of the UN system-wide evidence to inform programming. As it was mentioned, data is something critical and crucial when we are looking at youth-sensitive programming in peace and resilience. So let's watch now the video message.
"37 million children are displaced due to conflict, violence, and crisis. Young people are the hardest hit by conflict and suffer long-term consequences.
However, their voices are frequently excluded from peace-building efforts. To deliver on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, we must provide inclusive opportunities for young people to lead the way towards peace.
How can we empower and amplify the rights and voices of youth in peace and resilience building?"
The report, Lessons from the Meta-Synthesis of United Nations Evaluations to Advance the United Nations Youth Strategy, is a new resource capturing what worked and what did not work in United Nations youth programming for Priority 5 of the UN Youth Strategy on Peace and Resilience Building. Co-led by the evaluation offices of UNFPA and UNICEF, the meta-synthesis involved 11 organizations, including the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, as well as youth-led groups.
This is the second evaluation meta-synthesis capturing lessons from implementing the United Nations Youth Strategy. Our commitment to the United Nations reform process is reflected in these resources, as they provide high-quality interagencies evaluative evidence to inform programming and decision-making.
We hope these lessons are useful to youth peace builders, programmers, decision makers, and advocates, and will springboard ideas and solutions to enhance the participation of youth in peace and resilience building efforts.
We thank you for your participation today and wish you a fruitful and meaningful dialogue.
Thank you. I would like actually to say thank you to UNFPA and UNICEF evaluation offices to engaging in this difficult and also critical exercise that is looking at what works and what doesn't work. It was mentioned in the video. So thank you so much for that. And I think that it's a perfect segue to our next segment, where we'll have Karen Candidon, evaluation specialist at UNFPA, and Tammy Aritomi, evaluation specialist at UNICEF, both co-chair of the meta-synthesis report, and that will present us today some of the key lessons and highlights from the report. So over to you, Karen and Tammy.
Thanks, Ramaral. Good afternoon, everyone. We are very excited to be here to present to you the meta-synthesis report and the lessons that emerge from this report that will be launching the discussion. That what we hope today is an engaging and rich discussion on how we can enhance meaningful engagement of young people in peace building interventions. So the report is out now, and we encourage you to visit the link that's presented here, and we provided that in the chat box below, so you can access the report. Next slide. So as you heard in our director's message, this report was an interagency exercise across 11 organizations, a mix of both UN and youth-led organizations. It was co-led by our offices, our evaluation offices of UNFPA and UNICEF, and accompanied by the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, the Peacebuilding Support Office, Eval Youth, IOM, the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, UNDP, UNIDO, UNODC, the United Network of Young Peace Builders, and YoungGo. And through this exercise, we have seen that working in partnership with multiple entities increases UN coherence. It fosters a more strategic and effective interagency coordination and collaboration, and advances the work of the UN on youth issues in a coordinated, coherent, and holistic manner. This metasynthesis of evaluation reports on peace and resilience building generates evidence-based learning on what works and does not work in past implementation of Priority 5 of the UN Youth Strategy, Youth 2030 on peace and resilience building. It leverages existing evidence of 121 evaluation reports from 23 UN entities and identifies 5 lessons learned shared across UN entities, which I will turn now to my colleague from UNICEF, Tammy, to elaborate on. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. The lessons learned, the first lesson learned indicates that meaningful engagement with youth as leaders, creating enabling environments for youth leadership and decision-making processes is critical for transformative change. The second lesson specifies that interventions seeking to enhance inclusion of diverse groups of youth are more successful when activities are adapted to their different profiles and local contexts. Lesson 3, that interactive and experiential methodologies offer effective, inclusive ways to build the capacity of youth in peace-building competencies. Lesson 4 emphasizes that enhancing intergenerational interactions between youth and duty bearers to improve trust and solidarity can lead to catalytic and transformational effects in youth interventions. The 5th and final lesson indicates that strategic and well-defined partnerships across civil society, government, and the private sector reap significant benefits for youth projects in terms of effectiveness, reach, and inclusivity. We hope that these lessons provide some insights and serve as a launching pad for a broader discussion with the panelists who have been joining us today around engagement in peace building, resilience building programming. So thank you all, and over to you, back to you, Romano.
Thank you so much, Karen and Tammy. And I can indeed say that it was a long, intense, but very fruitful process to go through all the reviews of the different reports and extract those different lessons learned, which hopefully, as we have been saying, will really inform upcoming programming within the UN and beyond. So now we are ready, I think, to jump into a very insightful discussion on youth engagement in peace and resilience with 5 extraordinary panelists from different backgrounds. So I'm very happy to have with us today in the room, we have Noelia Richard, the Global Youth Lead at UNDP, Katrina Leclerc, Program Director for the Global Network of Women Peace Builders, Dana Podmolikova, Youth Program Management Specialist, also leading on the Youth Solidarity Fund at the United Nations Alliance of Civilization, Marie Doucet, Policy Specialist on Gender Responsive Peace Building and Focal Points for the Youth, Peace and Security Agenda at UN Women, and then last but not least, Hila Yoon, founder of the Afghan Youth Ambassador for Peace. So welcome to the 5 of you. Very exciting to now go into this discussion. We'll have different guiding questions that will enable us to look at how we can actually enhance youth engagement in peace and resilience building, which are some of the practical examples. So we have a very good composition here today from the UN, civil society organization, youth-led group. So I hope we can a little bit unpack what those lessons learned from this meta-synthesis mean from your different position and background, and how can we move forward the programming when it comes to peace and resilience, and really to accelerate the implementation of the Youth 2030 agenda. So with that, I would like to start with Noelia. Welcome, Noelia. And the guiding question that we want to ask you in particular is if you can reflect on how are UNDP interventions supporting the engagement of young people in the current peace-building programming, and what roles do they play, beneficiaries, partner, decision maker. This is something we have been discussing quite a lot, so I'm sure you will have many reflection around that. So thank you for being here, and over to you, Noelia.
Thank you so much, Romeral. It's really great to be with you all. And sorry because I'm sitting on the side of the ECOSOC Youth Forum, so I hope that it won't be too noisy. Really, first of all, I mean, I really want to acknowledge, I mean, this effort. I think whenever we see an evaluation specifically on youth or on youth, peace and security, we think it's already an achievement in itself, because I was reminiscing yesterday, like looking again at the publication, thinking about our first retreat, you know, when we did the first visioning exercise, like what would we imagine for the field also in 5 or 10 years. And we were dreaming about having, you know, flooding in another way, you know, the development community and peace building community with papers, with evaluations, with lessons learned documents. And finally, I mean, we're seeing indeed these trends, analysis, etc. And just kudos for that, because we know that it was not an easy process. Plus, this pillar specifically of the youth strategy is also much broader than just youth, peace, and security. So I think it also calls for probably a standalone, you know, conversation just on youth and climate in particular, which is also a huge part of the portfolio at the moment. So really thank you to the organizers and all the colleagues involved. I can focus on a few concrete examples. I mean, as you know, UNDP, I mean, work with young people throughout, I mean, all our thematic areas. And I would say that, so we both have like sectoral interventions with young people in a broad range of sectors, but also youth meaningful engagement in peace building interventions. And in particular, for instance, if I talk about the Solomon Island recent PBF project, so it's not a current one, but it's a very recent one with ILO, UNDP, and supported by the PBF in Solomon Island on enhancing youth political participation through local youth councils. And basically this project, I mean, empowered the most marginalized young Solomon Islanders that were participating, in particular young women, to engage in decision making and being also proactive youth social entrepreneurs that can in fact address the local sources of grievances. And also we supported specifically the establishment of youth caucuses that were able to address certain issues related to peace building, social cohesion, social entrepreneurship as well, areas that, including in geographical areas that were previously neglected. There was a project evaluation of this intervention, and it actually showed that it was really effective in, first of all, it did positively affect young people's behavior towards citizenship, towards gender equality, towards even just the fact of working with others in specific communities. And it also, not more importantly, but equally important, is the fact that it affects the other stakeholders in how they engage with young people and how they also perceive, finally, young people as more capable, responsible decision makers or leaders of their own. So that was an interesting intervention from that perspective, in a conflict, in a context of also citizen insecurity and really with a lot of grievances. There is another project also that I wanted to mention that is in Iraq, which is called Youth Groups as part of local peace mechanisms, which is part of a broader social cohesion program that we have in Iraq, and that's a current intervention until 2024. And that includes basically the brokering of a space where young people are feeding into the strategy to prevent violent extremism and working with the national committee on the implementation of that strategy. And we also support youth groups that implement a set of initiatives that are designed to enhance local peace capacities to sustain social cohesion, support the reintegration of internally displaced people, etc. So that's also an interesting one, because there is an aspect of really like convening power and bringing people together to feed into decision making, and also directly supporting youth-led initiatives for social cohesion. So I guess I will just offer a few lessons. I mean, and I think we're also preaching to the choir a little bit in this group, and I'm very happy to see a lot of people connected who I'm sure are also young peace builders. But just to say, so we know that local ownership and context matter. I think but we still sometimes need to actually repeat that. It's not that obvious to everybody. Meaningful engagement, of course, insisting on meaningful. which means having formal channels, formal mechanisms, and not just an intention of engaging, but or the idea that whoever you decide to engage will actually feed into decision making, but really creating the right incentives, the right enabling for environment for that. And that also means a safe space. That also means, having the right balance between youth participation at community level and also protective measures to safeguard young activists in certain contexts. Important to ensure inclusive consultations right from the start. Clearly, we see that projects are more successful whenever young people have had a chance to feed into the design of the project. So as an end in itself, I would say, because that is in itself meaningful engagement, but also because that's also generally at the beginning that you can really address conceptual issues, that you can address gender inequalities, that you can address issues related to marginalized and marginalization and inequalities more broadly. So it's really important at that stage of the design and of the conceptualization to really have young people on your side. I mean, that are really understanding also what it should be about, or that you actually co-design together that theory of change. Otherwise, well, no surprise if there isn't an uptake or impact. Also, the striving to prioritize direct support. So I did mention that direct support to youth-led initiatives. It's not always possible. We know there are operational challenges associated with that, but that's definitely our intention. So we're exploring all the channels we can. I mean, depending on the context for that to be as direct as possible. And just to say that in terms of the programming, it's great to have very well-designed interventions, but more importantly, they should really speak to one another. So avoiding duplication is also something that I think we're all trying to support. I mean, by really like working together as much as possible. A lot of joint work plans are being prepared at the moment. We work together to support youth peace and security roadmaps, and I think that's also sometimes a requirement to pre-requirement to have meaningful interventions and meaningful projects and programs. So with that, I will stop, and I really thank you for inviting us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I just want to echo something that I feel we have been advancing when it comes to meaningful youth engagement throughout programming cycles, so from designing to implementation monitoring. But perhaps, especially having been part of the research team, also we need to see how do we reflect this meaningful youth engagement in the evaluation we do, because it was extremely difficult to actually understand when that engagement with young people was meaningful or not. So I think that's also some of the learning that came out through the meta-synthesis. So thank you so much, Noelia, also for prompting that. Also, just to remind to everyone that, of course, please do post your question. We'll have a moment towards the end of the panel to take a couple of questions, and also reminding the panelists that we'll have 2-3 minutes for everyone to respond to the different question. I know it's a short time, but we'll hope to finish on time this virtual conversation. Having said that, I would like now to look at Katrina and very pleased to ask you some very important question as well on how can we actually enhance youth engagement and peace and resilience building from your perspective, from the perspective of the global network of young women peace builders, and also what do you think are some of the practical examples that you can draw through your work, but also which have been some of the challenges. So thank you so much, Katrina, and over to you.
Thank you, Romaral, and thank you to the co-organizers for the invitation to share some of the experiences we've had at the Global Network of Women Peace Builders. One of the biggest concerns I see both in programming and in the field is that we consider youth empowerment, youth resilience, and youth peace building as projects. So they're often short-term, conceptualized by individuals who are far removed from the realities of local individuals, local young people, and most often they're not in true partnership with young people. Noella kind of talked a little bit about this. But one practical example of enhanced youth engagement that I'd like to highlight is from GNWP's Young Women Plus Leaders for Peace program. We launched this in 2014, originally as a literacy and numeracy project. GNWP quickly shifted its approach to respond to the needs and the context, and also to remove the whole idea of being a project to a long-standing program. Now, with more than 12 different countries, the Young Women Leaders chapters are unique, they're bold, and they're pushing the dial forward in their communities. This program, which began as a pilot to help young women learn how to read and write in conflict-affected communities, has become a co-developed, co-driven, and co-led platform for young women in their communities to respond to their realities and to challenge sometimes the status quo. The YWL program breaks silos and ensures the synergies also with the Women, Peace and Security and Youth, Peace and Security agendas. We train young women who live in conflict-affected areas and face humanitarian emergencies on leadership, peace building, of course, literacy and numeracy education, but also in economic empowerment, social media for advocacy, and theater for peace building dialogues. The young women use the knowledge that they gain through the formal leadership training, but they also organize advocacy campaigns, deliver training themselves, and promote a culture of peace and inclusivity in their countries and communities. So since 2014, over 10,000 of these young women from all over the world, starting from Bangladesh to Colombia to the Democratic Republic of Congo, Georgia, Indonesia, Lebanon, Myanmar, Nigeria, the Philippines, Rwanda, South Sudan, and Ukraine, have participated in global, regional, national, and local policy discussions, but also, of course, are leading in local gender-responsive peace-building efforts themselves. The efforts, for example, of the YWL chapter in the Philippines were cited in the UN Secretary General's first report to the Security Council on Youth, Peace and Security. We're very proud of this. And the young women were cited for the work that they did in leading interreligious dialogues in conflict-affected communities of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region to help address the limited local understanding of the peace agreement and building local ownership of the Bangsamoro Organic Law. In DRC, for example, in late 2020, the YWL came to us and they said that they wanted, with other youth leaders, to create a national level youth peace and security coalition in DRC. In true GNWP fashion, we quickly endorsed their idea and ran alongside them to support the creation of this initiative. The YPS coalition in Kinshasa, along with now the provincial chapters, was instrumental to the development of the first Youth Peace and Security National Action Plan in the country, which was launched last August. At the end of the day, there are many barriers to young women's and young people's work being recognized, but their peace and resilience efforts are happening whether we recognize them or not. It is up to us as members of the international community, but also particularly those working at the UN, to understand that these barriers, what they are, but also to look inwards. So I'm very happy to see that this work is being done. But how can we change our approaches to respond to what young people have been saying already for decades? Sometimes I claim to be within the youth bracket, so I say we often find ourselves or feel like we're broken records. One of the ways we can do this is to move away from the projectization of peace. Seeing peace and resilience building as mere projects with scarce funding for only a limited few months is one of the biggest issues. If we want to see real change, and more importantly, if we want to substantially support the real change that is happening, we need to move to the beat of the young people's drums. We know peace building is a process, so it is not a project. Why does it not translate in our programming and the way that we respond to the needs of communities? I also want to recognize that there are a lot of efforts and changes that have happened in the UN system. The mere fact that this research itself has happened and was conducted is a good step forward. But we know that research does little if the findings are not implemented, and that has often been our biggest issue within the global community. Lastly, I want to make one more point, more so on the contradiction about the relationship between the United Nations and many young people. It's widely known and documented that young people in most countries share a large distrust of governments. Yet several of them idolize the UN and look up to the institution for answers. I choose to see this as an opportunity for accountability and to be honest in relationship building with youth leaders across the world. Most of the young people who I have the privilege of working with want to be collaborative, seize opportunities, and drive peace in their communities. So the UN system needs to seize, in turn, the opportunity to harness and amplify the power of these young people. Thank you so much. Back to you.
Thank you, Katerina. And I think you ended with a very powerful notes and requests, if I may say, to the UN on how are we actually going to implement and really being accountable to the different lessons learned we have from this particular report. And thank you so much for being very clear on this point. I think this is something we all need to see. How do we move forward from this findings, notes into like concrete action and implementation of the lesson learned. So thank you for that. And you also mentioned, of course, and we have been touching upon today quite a lot, and throughout the ECOSOC Youth Forum, this is something that came out very strongly, the question of funding, which are the budgetary commitment that actually will support the implementation of those lessons learned, as you were also mentioning. And I think Dana will be able to reflect a little bit on that, because we had been looking quite a lot to UNAOC as one of the key agency having being able to support financially youth-led projects and initiatives. So Dana, with that, I would like to ask you what lesson presented today through the meta-synthesis resonate with your experience with the work you do at UNAOC, and which maybe other lessons would be key to discuss and that were not highlighted yet. So thank you, Dana, and over to you.
Thank you, Romeral. Again, let me echo the sentiment that it's a privilege to be here today with you guys. And yes, let me just dive in straight to your questions. Using Youth Solidarity Fund as an example, as a case study on how we can address the lessons learned from the meta-synthesis report. So just very briefly, the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations established the Youth Solidarity Fund in 2008 to support youth-led projects promoting social cohesion and tackling polarization. And since its inception, YSF has funded 73 youth-led projects in 42 countries and invested roughly 2.5 million. And it's important to say that the funded projects are all developed and implemented by young people. And today, unfortunately, it is still one of the very few funding windows in the United Nations system dedicated to implementation of the youth peace and security agenda and funding directly youth organizations. I think that has been mentioned by my colleagues just now and a little earlier, that this remains one of the biggest challenges, that there is a lack of mechanisms across the UN system to fund directly youth-led organizations. So we are quite proud that we have one of these mechanisms in place. But back to your question, back to reflections on the lessons learned and how I can use Youth Solidarity Fund as an example of how we can respond to them. So the first one was meaningfully engaging youth as leaders. So youth is one of the main pillars of the UNAOC work, and through its innovative and creative programs that we do here, they are all recognizing young people as agents of change for their immense potential and creativity to contribute to peace building more broadly. So the Youth Solidarity Fund is one of our flagship programs and has a long history of supporting youth-led organizations that foster a peaceful and inclusive societies. In addition, we work with the alumni. So once, and the YSF alumni, the organizations are completed, we try to engage them further as strategic partners to help us shape the fund, identify emerging priorities, and support the selection and development of proposals for the recurrent calls. We currently have actually one open, so we are now again on a lookout for youth-led projects across the world that are promoting social cohesion and tackling polarization. So we try to engage young people also post projects. So that is one strategy to sort of tackle what Katrina was just mentioning, that unfortunately our interventions seem to be very short-lived for project-based only. So we are looking into ways of how we can make it more long-term and sustainable. And not always, unfortunately, it's possible through sustained funding, but that doesn't mean that there are no other strategies. So for us right now, it is to involve our alumni as much as possible in shaping the fund experience, so to say, for the new cohorts. The second lesson that was talking about enhancing inclusion through targeted adaptations. Again, we recognize that young people have a better access to diverse groups in their communities. They are better positioned to mobilize their peers. So YSF supports projects that reach out to the most vulnerable, most marginalized youth from different socioeconomic, cultural, and religious backgrounds that we might not reach, through just opening up the call. Again, many issues, digital gap, you name it. So we heavily rely again on young people's networks around the world to spread the word, to disseminate the call, hoping that this way we can reach, those that we would not reach just basically putting our call, on internet or social media, because not everybody has an access. The third lesson that was mentioned was about utilizing interactive and experiential methodologies. So again, to address the ever more complex needs and aspirations and demands of young people, YSF is evolving and expands its support models as well. So from the early on, YSF recognized the need to go beyond just the funding and provide various training opportunities. So through different courses and workshops, we work with the young leaders to strengthen their planning and implementation skills, enhance the project sustainability, and provide them with networking opportunities. To expand the pool of beneficiaries for YSF, UNAOC in the last cycle introduced webinars during the application process already and workshops during the selection process. So before it's actually decided who gets the funding, we expanded our capacity building support to strengthen the proposals before the final selection of the final decision is made, to also, recognizing that we are not able to fund all of them, but with this expanded pool of organization being able to benefit from this additional capacity building support, we are hoping that even though they cannot get the funding through the YSF in the end, they have a strong enough proposal that they can approach other funding streams and donors with that. The other lesson mentioned was the strategic and well-defined partnerships. And I think we all agree that it is critical to provide multi-layered support to young peace builders to maximize the impact of their efforts. Also on the projects, I think it's important to mention that the projects that are funded through YSF often engage with multiple actors, including like religious leaders, political leaders, policymakers, educational institutions, media, and of course other young people, because we recognize that this can help them to have a greater impact on their communities. Also, often that would relate to the other lesson that I have not mentioned, that was all about improving the intergenerational trust and solidarity. I think through the different projects we have funded through YSF, we witnessed it, that when young people engage with elders in their communities, they are also able to reach wider community, not just young people. So that actually makes their projects more impactful because they reach beyond just the peers, they are impacting their whole communities. On the last,
I will just ask you to wrap up if possible, because we are going a little bit over time. So please,
absolutely. I'm just going to quickly say the two, without going into any details, the two lessons that have been also just marginally mentioned, but are not mentioned in that report, would be to go beyond just the structured capacity building, but provide also mentorship that will support organizational growth and personal development. So not just capacity for the project themselves. And the other one that was also mentioned would be the predictable and sustained funding. And I wrap it there, and maybe if there is a questions
Thank
later.
you. Thank you, Dana. And sorry, I have this terrible role to have to cut, and you can see that we are over time and still two great intervention to come. But just to remind everyone that there are questions that coming through the chat. So feel free also, all the panelists, I invite you to please look at the question and respond. And also just to highlight perhaps one thing, Dana, you mentioned, that is this sustainability and how do we look beyond the end of the project, and which are some of the alternatives to make sure that the engagement with young people is sustainable and can support different phases and different groups. So thank you so much for that. I will now give the floor to Marie so that you can give us a little bit more insight and unpack what does this whole question on programming in peace and resilience means from the lens of the involvement of young women, and which have been the drivers and challenges to engage young women in this intervention. So over to you, Marie.
Thank you very much, Romeral, and thank you for having me today. I will try to keep it short, but don't hesitate to flag me if I'm going over time. I think Katrina touched a little bit already upon the programming with young women specifically, and it's a big component of my work to work on the synergies between the Women, Peace and Security agenda and the Youth, Peace and Security agenda. And I think it's no secret for anyone that young women specifically face double discrimination patterns, both due to their age and gender. They also face gender-specific protection challenges, whether in the streets, at school, online, but also in their own homes. At the same time, we've witnessed in recent years that young women have become, I think, increasingly visible. They have always been there, but the visibility has grown, I think. And they're often at the forefront of civic movements, peaceful protests, peace-building initiatives, humanitarian responses, climate action, you name it. So in order to better understand this, UN Women commissioned last year a study on the impacts of COVID-19 on young women peace builders. And there were a couple of recommendations that were quite straightforward and come at no surprise. Basically, the study stressed the need to pay specific attention to the work of young women peace builders through accessible, flexible, predictable funding, of course, but also through paid peace building opportunities, accessible in-person capacity building and learning opportunities, because we know that even though the digitalization of peacebuilding work has created opportunities for engagement, we still have the digital gap that many young women don't necessarily have access to online technologies, and it's also creating new type of barriers. And there is also a need for the creation of networking space for young women. So in a nutshell, there needs to be dedicated actions specifically targeting and working with young women. We need to also pay attention a lot to intersectionality. This is echoing the second lessons learned on inclusion in the report, but really pay attention to other vulnerability factors and how they play out when we look at young women specifically. So we already have double discrimination pattern, but what does it mean to be a young woman living with disabilities, or from ethnic and religious minority, member of the LGBTQI+ community, etc. So it's really important to pay specific attention to these challenges. Otherwise, these are groups of people that will become even more invisibilized in the work that we do. To try and respond to a couple of these challenges, UN Women, in partnership with the UNAOC, Dana, who is present on this call, UNFPA and UNICEF, organized a pilot program to support young women peace builders. It's, again, a pilot initiative. We had a 4-day in-person capacity building workshop organized last month in Tbilisi, Georgia, for 20 young women peace builders, aged between 20 and 30 years old, all of them coming and living in conflict or crisis-affected countries. And I won't enter into too many details on the content of the program, but more on some of the lessons learned. Again, I think diversity was critical for working with the diverse group of young women, making sure that we have people coming, not only from the capital city, but also from more remote locations, coming from different subgroups, working on different peace building areas, not necessarily connected to the UN or other big international NGOs and CSO actors. I think another very good lessons learned that we had was how important it was to create a safe space for young women only. So it is absolutely important to include young women in any activities we do with young people, but it's also equally important to have dedicated space for young women only, safe space where they can share on their role, challenges, but also share solutions across different cultures and contexts. And we've seen how important it was for these 20 young women that did not know each other before, how in like 1-2 days, they were able across different continents to realize they were sharing some of the same issues, you know, when it comes to protection, issues related to sexual and gender-based violence, and be able to share these, but also to identify common solutions, to have peer exchange and conversation on these very difficult topics. And this would not have been possible if it was not a small group with young women only in the room. One of the challenge, of course.
Thank you, Marie. I will, just ask you to start wrapping up, if that's okay. You allow me to interrupt you, so I took the chance.
Absolutely. No, I will stop here, but just to flag that this basically will not happen alone. So we need to have proactive and intentional efforts to work with young women, and we need to plan ahead with time and resources, because it does take additional effort to reach out to the one who are most marginalized. It costs money, and so we need to be intentional about this. Thank you. I will stop here.
Thank you. No, thank you, Maria. And I think, yeah, I couldn't agree more on what you just say. I mean, we need to be intentional. We need to program well and well in advance, because if we want to actually talk about diversity, meaningful engagement, inclusion, that really needs to go a step forward on how we do programming. So I think you reflected very well with the concrete example you were mentioning on how do we create safe spaces, what does it mean for different groups. So yeah, the commitment, the intention needs to be there, and we have and we should do better, definitely. So thank you so much, Marie. I would like now to give the floor to Hila. Thank you, Hila, for being with us today. As a young woman peace builder who has created your own organization, who I know has engaged with most of us here today through different hats and through different opportunities, I would like you to ask what is next? What are the opportunities and challenges to support and engage young people in peace and resilience building intervention? So thank you, Hila, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me for this opportunity. To begin with, because we are short on time as well, I want to just say 3 practical challenges that we face as a young activist, but also opportunities where we can engage more with young peace builders. To begin with, I think one area that we need to focus a lot is implementation and accountability. It's still the year 2023, and we're still stuck with the consultation and online webinars and asking the same question all over again about what are the challenges and what are the opportunities. We have been seeing so many reports published by different INGO sectors and the UN, and resolution next by resolution, and so many challenges and recommendations which is already visible. And we are all expert when we attend these calls, and we know those opportunities and we know those challenges. But what we are lacking is the implementation of those resolutions and how we can localize those resolutions and those reports on the ground and the solution that we have. So I think implementation and localization should be an area where we should focus more, instead of like more consultation and repetitive resolution. Second is we should focus more on providing safe spaces for youth who are engaging in peace building processes, because peace building processes and peace projects are in countries with conflict, but also less development countries. And in many countries where young activists and peace builders, especially young women who are working towards peace building, they do not have enough support from UN and INGOs when it comes to their safety. How can they raise their voices when they know the next day they will be shot to death? We need strong safeguarding practices and support from the UN and other INGOs and UN entities as well when it comes to supporting peace builders on the ground, because their safety should come first before implementing any projects on the ground. And that's what strong support that they need. The third practical solution, and one of the challenges a lot of grassroots activists face a lot, is lack of flexible funding. I know we're talking a lot about providing fundings, but from my experience still working with the UN and with other UN agencies, we always struggle with funding because a lot of NGOs who are working at the local level face a lot of restriction when it comes to like registering their NGO, and there's also security issues. If you're a registered NGO in a conflict zone, and especially if you're a woman leading an NGO, it's not safer to publicize your NGO and the work that you've been doing. But at the same time, the UN will tell you, and the UN other agency will tell you, okay, we cannot provide you these fundings because you're not meeting the specific criteria. But at the same time, that those local NGOs have been doing more work that the UN haven't done in years. And they are connected with the tribal leaders, they're connected with the local leaders, but what they don't have is flexible funding. And one important thing is that we should acknowledge passport privilege. A lot of young peace builders who are working on the ground, they don't have the opportunity to come at the UN headquarters or other international platform where the priority should be providing support and amplifying the voices of young activists and local peace builders who are working on the ground. But at the same time, they face visa discrimination. They don't have the opportunity to come. And the alternative for them is, okay, virtual participation. But let's not forget that online Zoom calls can never replace in-person gathering and storytelling environment, because we should also acknowledge that a lot of young people in conflict zone don't have access to internet, do not have access to even a computer or a laptop where they can actually get online. And the important thing is the language barrier. Not everyone speaks English when it comes to amplifying their voices. I think these are the things that we should focus more when we're actually trying to provide that safe spaces, providing those opportunities for young leaders. Let's just move on from the UN headquarters and actually go on the ground and meet the local people, meet the local activists who are working towards sustainable peace, and really acknowledge the visa discrimination and the passport privilege. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ila. Sorry, we are having some echo because we are actually sharing the room, and very powerful words. Once again, I just want to highlight perhaps a few things that when we talk about funding, as you were mentioning, Hila, we also need to see what does it mean? And you touch upon the question of the flexibility. Also, is funding available to which kind of youth-led groups, the ones who are only registered, the ones who only have access to bigger institutions, etc. So I think we would really need to also unpack a little bit more this question of funding. You also touch upon the implementation, the localization, and the tiredness to have to repeat most of the things that young people have been repeating for a very long time, and that it's again now time to put the words into action. So thank you so much, Hila, for that. And thank you to everyone of our panelists for engaging. I am just being very conscious of time. We had a very ambitious program today with a lot of speakers. I know most of the questions that were posed on the chat have been answered by our panelists. So if that's agreeable with our participants, we'll straight go into the closing remarks. I'm sure from the organizer, they have been able to share more information, resources, and how to contact us for follow-up questions as well. So thank you everyone once again, and I would like now to hear more from Gabriela Renteria Flores, who is the chair of the Eval Youth Global Network, for some closing remarks. Over to you, Gabriela.
Thanks a lot, Romerel, and thanks a lot to all the speakers who preceded me. It was really insightful, and I'll just, as a wrap-up of the event, I would like to reflect on the role of youth in the accountability process and evidence gathering. I want to leave you with some key takeaways. Firstly, we have seen the calls of youth on different topics as climate change, gender equality, peace, and resilience building. By doing so, youth are key in the accountability processes to hold those in power responsible for their actions and to demand transparency, peace, social justice. Through activism and advocacy, younger generations can be crucial in accountability processes. In order for youth to play a meaningful role in accountability processes, it is essential that they are empowered with the resources they need to participate effectively, as it was previously mentioned. This includes not only economic and financial resources, but also access to information, training, support, and meaningful opportunities to engage in decision-making processes. The second point I would like to briefly mention is to make the role of youth and young and emerging evaluators in evidence gathering by bringing unique perspectives and insight to the process. First, we need to acknowledge that even when we talk about youth, youth is not an homogeneous group, but rather an heterogeneous group in which experiences and knowledge youth bring has to be recognized, fully and meaningfully recognized. One of the lessons is actually about enhancing inclusion of youth and diverse groups of young people to have adapted activities to their context. And I totally agree, because youth can offer fresh perspectives on issues that affect them directly or indirectly, and can provide valuable feedback on the effectiveness of programs, policies, etc., that are actually trying to address their needs. Youth and young evaluators can contribute to evidence gathering in real participatory evaluation ways, participating along different processes, and can work to co-create evaluation and studies and tools that are relevant and appropriate for their age group and context. Overall, involving youth and young evaluators into evidence gathering and evaluation processes can lead to a more inclusive and relevant evaluation studies, and can help them to ensure that the needs and perspective of young people are taken into account. Finally, it's essential that we can create more opportunities for young people to get involved in these efforts in a safe space. We must empower young people to speak out, to participate in decision-making processes, and to really take action. I just want to thank all of you for taking the time to join today and for engaging in this important conversation. Let's continue to work together to empower youth and to ensure that they have a meaningful role in creating a more peace and resilient world. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Gabriela. And indeed, we need young people in evaluation processes as well. So thank you so much for that. And with this, I would like to conclude our side event. Thank you to everyone for joining us today virtually, for staying a little bit longer with us. And of course, a big thank you to the organizer, the speakers as well. So I hope you enjoy the conversation, and thank you so much.